was. There was so many boxers there, because when they spar, they all stand on this side of the ring waiting to come in. And there's two in there, both look like little Roy Joneses, and there was loads and loads of parents in the place. It was just packed, standing room only. But for the benefit of the more uninitiated in the boxing scene, if the York Hall is the most iconic boxing venue in the UK, I'm pretty confident in saying this is the most iconic amateur boxing club in the UK, and possibly even Europe. The Repton Boxing Club and that kind of whole legend of the green and gold is a massive thing in boxing. The club itself started in 1884, as once again I think it probably says that somewhere on this building, established in 1884. The original location was in Victoria Park Square. It was a 3-storey townhouse which offered many disciplines to young disenfranchised youth in the East End in the late 1800s, boxing being merely one of them. There was a mission. It started in Derby. There was a Repton mission based in Derby that decided to attend some charity in the East End of London, and they started a lot of clubs for young people. They had cricket and athletics and everything, but the boxing one is the only one that survived and stood the test of time. I suspect that's not a coincidence when you look at an area like this. So obviously this area has vastly changed over the years. There's a high Bengali population, a high Muslim population today, when there was a time when it was full of your more kind of pie and mash, cockney, jellied eels, died in the Wall East Enders. There's been a huge kind of migration of that more indigenous East End population. Having said that, the area has always had an influx of immigration. Jewish population was massive here until there was a big Jewish migration to the United States and all the rest of it. But as I say, the original location was Victoria. In 1971, it briefly had a stint up at Pollard's Row, the working man's club. I toyed with the idea of going there, but I thought ultimately all I'm doing is taking you down an alleyway, standing outside a working man's club that's closed, and oh yeah, it used to be here for 4 years. I mean, I do have fond memories of the place, because I used to go out with a burlesque dancer who used to do a show there, and I used to work the bar back in the day, which was, it was nice work if you could get it, but I wouldn't go back though. So in 1975, it moved to here. They lost that Bethnal Green working man's premises, and they moved to this premises where they've been to this day. For me, the Repton will always be about Tony Burns. He died, I believe it was 2021. He was the head coach. He was this legendary figure that was just one of those guys that just made an extraordinary, profound impression on almost every young boxer he came to deal with. He was outwardly the most ill-mannered and truculent person you could ever meet, especially when you first met him. It was like he was deliberately trying to dig you out and see if you could take it. I remember there was one lad that turned up one night, and he was like, a bit like an Asian rude boy kid who said he had a mission, bruv. He'd come all the way from East Ham and wanted to be a boxer. And Tony had said to him, he said, I'm not being funny, but you look like a buff. And you can see this kid thinking, how do I react to this? Nothing in his hard wiring or programming had taught him how to deal with this situation of this older guy, as wide as he is tall, saying you look like a puff. And then Burnsy, not content with that, said, no, I'm just saying, and bear in mind this was 2005, already a different era. He said, all I'm saying is, are you homosexual? And he said, there's nothing wrong with it. He said, I'm just asking if you. And it literally, that is just literally, I mean, you'd think, well, who does that? But that was his manner. Not always quite as combative as that, but that's the way he was. Tony Burns himself, he's from this area, born and bred. Well, I say born and bred, that's a lie. He was born in Wales, and this was the thing. He insisted to anybody who ever spoke, to anyone who would listen, that he was Welsh. He was not a Londoner. So, even though he probably is about as representative as the East End as any figure I've ever met in my life. He was from Wales, and he very proudly told everybody that he captained Wales he boxed for Wales 22 times as an amateur, and he captained the team 16 times. One of those times you reminded me of it, David. The guy called David James was the was one of his teammates who went on to become the Welsh national coach. They were in the dressing room one time. Burnsy, by his own admission, was not terribly dedicated. He would smoke. He didn't like running. And everyone suggested he go for a run. He'd say, I've got the car outside. What would I want to do that for? But, some of these kids, they stay fit from boxing all the time. He boxed a lot. He reckons he had about 200 amateur fights. He was a very good boxer. I don't think he ever won a national title, but he boxed for Wales all those times. He lost a very close decision to the great Ken Buchanan at Manor Place Baths in 1965. People said he was very unlucky. On that same bill, Dick McTaggart lost the decision to the referee, the future referee Larry O'Connell. And the subtext for that day is that the Scots were annoyed that O'Connell had got the decision, and they, sometimes they almost give one back and they go the other way a little bit. And Burnsy thinks he got the short end of the decision to Ken Buchanan because it was payback for the fact that O'Connell from London had beaten Dick McTaggart. He said, "I'd never seen anybody beat McTaggart till that day." But he's in the dressing room one time with a cigarette on the go in the changing rooms. And David James says to Burnsy, "You better put that fag out you're on in a minute." And to which he supposedly replied, "Hold your noise, James. I'm team captain." So that was his kind of ethos. He says he had an unbelievable talent. If you ever asked him, he said, "I just had an unbelievable talent, but I wasn't dedicated." So he could have turned pro, and he had offers from Mickey Duff and I'm trying to think who. Terry Lawless was also on the scene at the time. They very much wanted him to turn pro, and he said, not necessarily because I was any good, but because I could sell out the York Hall 5 times over, because he's from a very big family that lived in Bacon Street, just around the corner. But he said he spoke to the 2 most important people in his life, which was his wife Barbara and his father Harry, and they didn't want him to do it. Neither one of them wanted him to do it, so he decided to devote the rest of his life to coaching, and he became the head coach of Repton in 1967. Within a year, he was on his way to Mexico City to the Olympics with John H. Stracey. John H. Stracey got knocked out in the semi-final of the ABAs by Jim Watt from Scotland, former future world champion. Yeah. And Watt made the Olympic team for 1968. They were lightweights at the time. And Watt wouldn't go because he couldn't take his club coach. If you get picked for the Olympics, your club coach can't take you, and he can't be in your corner. You have to be the England squad coaches. Right. Watt refused to go without his club coach. So it's a hell of a sacrifice to make. But I guess it's loyalty, isn't it? Someone tell Conor Bennett. So you can cut that bit. I don't mean take it. I don't mean keep it out. Keep it in. Cut it, edit it. We'll use that. Yeah. I'm not worried about Conor Bennett.
No, we've got him.
So John Stracey as the losing finalist. I don't know what happened to the fellow who lost to Watt in the final. That's a bit of a. I'm going to have to check that out. We can box rock it today because we have amateur record database. But for whatever reason, the next in line to go was Stracey, who had been chinned in the first round by Watt. And Burnsy said, I still remember going to his house just around the corner from here and saying, "John, sit down, get ready for this. You're going to the Olympics." He was only 18, John H. Stracey, and he went out there. He didn't medal. I think he lost. I think he may have lost his first bout in the Olympics, Stracey, in actual fact, or if it wasn't his first bout, he lost in the second series. But that was Tony Burns up and running as the head coach at Repton. After that, he had for a while. If we could go inside, which we have done on previous tours, you'd see the list of achievements on the wall that shows you just how many Olympians and international representatives they've had over that period during his stewardship, Tony Burns. It was a good club before, but it became a great club when Tony Burns took the reins. In 1972, he had the Olympians. He had Graham Mountain, Maurice Hope, and Neville Cole. He was more of a Fitzroy Lodge boxer, right, Neville Cole? But I think he briefly had a stint at Repton, and if it wasn't him, it might have been somebody else that was there. But regardless, in '76, one of the more notable stories about Burnsy and the Olympics was he got deported from the 1976 Olympics in Canada. The reason being, he had Dave Odwell in the Olympics. Who else did they have in '76? Dave Odwell. There were more representatives than that. My mind's briefly drawn a blank. It will come to me walking down the street, a bit like the other thing did. But Dave Odwell is the key Olympian, 2-time ABA champion who was going to the 1976 Olympics in Montreal. Burnsy said you weren't supposed to be out there as a club coach. You certainly weren't supposed to be in the Olympic Village. What Burnsy had said is, I want to come over. A few of his associates wanted to come over. So he said to Dave Odwell, I need you to get me as many Olympic team passes for the Olympic Village as you can. I don't care where you get them from, but just get them. So Dave Odwell, being a good obedient boxer, he waits for some Eastern European swimming team to go swimming, practicing training, because obviously they take their stuff off and swim in trucks. So their stuff, obviously he figures their passes must be in their pockets, right? He said he doesn't know if they were Russians or what. He said they were talking some funny Eastern European language, I quote. He says, so he goes and rifles all the changing rooms, takes all these passes, So Burnsy and his mates could use them to get into the Olympic Village. So the next thing you know, a few days later, you've got all these Cockney White boys lording it about the Olympic Village with names like Dmitry Shinenko and all that. So you're hoping nobody talks to them. So that was okay for a while until it got rumbled. And the person who cracked under question, who was somehow called into for questioning, was Gary Duff. It was Mickey Duff's son. Apparently, Gary, you know, once again, no disrespect, Gary, I think I got him on Facebook. He did not hold up under questioning. Dave Obwell did. They were saying, do you know a man called Tony Burns? And he was like saying, I don't know, it rings a bell. I think he's a trainer, isn't he? They go, yes, he's your trainer. That's how he is. He's your trainer. And he says, I think I've sort of heard of him, but I don't really know him. You know? And so Dave held up, but Gary Duff didn't. He ended up blowing the whole thing. And then I said to Burnsy, you know, one time, many years later, when I came into the coach in 2005, I said, did you get deported? He said, well, they said I should go home, is what it was. what they suggested, yeah. So, but he said while he was there, they got to play five-a-side football with Sugar Ray Leonard, Michael Spinks, and Leon Spinks. He actually said, again, I'm conscious that I have in part a younger audience, but he said, the Spinks brothers, they were shoving all that up their nose, which, you know, it's doesn't entirely surprise me when you look at how dysfunctional Leon's life was certainly later on.
Yeah.
But he said that
Michael, though.
Say again?
I'd be surprised about Michael, though.
Yeah, and maybe he's tarred Michael with the same brush as Leon when it was actually Leon who was at it. But he said, you know, because Sugar Ray Leonard came here in 2005, and they had not met since that time of playing football together, just a little coach for goalpost game in the Olympic Village all those years later. But there still seemed to be a certain bond between them and a kinship. What was funny about that day was we're waiting, everybody's in there wearing their Repton tracksuits and their Repton vests, we're all on hand, we're all waiting to meet the great Sugar Ray Leonard. I'd never met Ray before. Obviously, these days, we play green balls together whenever we can and we're very close, but no, not really. But at the time, I'd never met him. I had no Facebook, I had no reputation, I was just some fellow with a Repton tracksuit who was coaching him. And we're waiting for Sugar Ray Leonard, and at some point we see this minibus pull up, and Dave Robertson, the chairman's there, Tony's there, a few dignitaries on hand, the East London Advertiser, journalists, all the rest of it, all the kids are in there, and we're like, oh, maybe this is him. And it was Mad Frankie Fraser who got out. Because Mad Frankie Fraser, notorious gangster, and I don't want to taint this tour too much of gangsterism, but permit me one guilty pleasure, just literally around the corner on that gangster at the front. But he's a notorious gangster called Mad Frankie Fraser, and things being what they are, when he came out of prison, he served literally 40 years of his life in prison. He was only 70. So he'd done more time in prison, literally, not in sentences theory, literally in real time. He'd done more time behind the door than he'd ever lived outside. When he came out, the one way he could make a living was to do these gangland tours, a bit like these tours, only full of no-marks who like cozying up to gangsters. Not like this. He used to come to this gym, which, to be honest, on a serious note, I didn't really like that. If you're going to do your gangster tour and talk about this, that and the other, and about gangsterism and violence, that's fine, but I don't think you should bring it here, and I actually mean that. I don't think... And I quite liked Frank. He had a certain mystique to me. I went through a period in my 20s of reading those books and all the rest of it, and he was an interesting guy with a kind of... He was kind of a raconteur of an alternative history of London, but I didn't like him, particularly bringing the element that he brought to this gym. But in any case, this was him on the day Sugar Ray Leonard was coming. And then Burnsy goes, as he gets out, Burnsy goes, oh no, it's Frankie Fraser. And then they went, Frank, honestly, mate, come in quickly, but quick as you can today, Frank, please, yeah? Just get in and out, will you? Because we've got Sugar Ray Leonard coming, and this is not going to look good, you know. Because apparently there was another time when there was a show at the, was it the Anglo Sporting Club or the Anglo-American, the Hilton in...
Anglo-American.
Yeah.
The Anglo-American Sporting Club. There was a big show there once, and there was a lot of top brass policemen there at this big Repton show, you know, a big gala show. And Frankie was there, and one of these really high-ranking police officers actually saw him and said to Tony Burns, "Is that who I think it is?" And then Jonesy said, "Yeah, he's my mate." You know, he didn't care, but we had to get him out. At the end of the day, as much as Frankie Fraser is an interesting guy to an extent, he's dead now. I would say he's for real at least. I mean, there's nothing worse than a plastic gangster. I certainly wouldn't say Frank was a category. But when it comes to a toss-up between him and Sugar Ray Leonard, I don't think it's even close, isn't it? I think he's lucky he got in there at all that day. But as I say, Tony Burns sadly died 2021. It was a massive thing. It was a massive loss. I know that any boxer who spent any time around him regarded him as a second father. You know, he was just one of those guys, particularly since the way he behaved to you. Well, first time I come down here, he had me spar with this guy, and then afterwards he said, you know, I was talking about the Northwest divs and Northeast divs, and when I was likely to meet this guy in theory in the London. I said, when's the London semi-finals? But he said, well, worry about the Northwest first, because looking at you, you wouldn't win the junior championships. And that's what he was always like. He always told me I was completely useless. And then eventually one day he'd give you a compliment and tell you weren't bad, or someone else told you, he said you were pretty good, you know.
Yeah.
And that kind of affection, that grizzled affection you got from him was all the more precious because it was hard won. Because because some people will tell you anything to make you feel good, you know. Or, but Burnsy wouldn't do that. So when he ever did give you a compliment, it was worth its weight in diamonds. And I remember, ask any of the lads who box under him in that classic era, and they'll tell you that he's in their top 5 people in humanity that they've ever met. You know. So, and it would have been a massive funeral, but for the fact we had all that COVID lockdown stuff going on, which was a shame because we watched it in here. There was a hookup, like a video link to watch the funeral, and most of us congregated in here. There's only certain people who went to it, but it was a shame. It was still a big send-off, but it was a shame he didn't get the send-off he deserved. I would tell you about Gary Barker, but I think probably spent quite a lot of time on this particular thing, so maybe we'll move on. For anyone who doesn't know already, No Guts, No Glory is the Repton mantra. It's written all over the it's written all over the gym inside. I've seen other gyms take it, but I'm pretty sure it started here.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, at some point today, we're passing nearby. Darren Barker's got a gym now called 12x3 in Aldgate, and we're possibly passing the route today. And I think they've got No Guts, No Glory in it as well. But I guess Darren's entitled to use it. All right. On the subject of gangsterism, let's go literally around the corner.